I walked into my lakefront A-frame, expecting silence after my aunt's funeral, only to find a toddler bouncing on my couch, his parents unpacking boxes, and Vanessa Holloway, the HOA president, counting stacks of cash by my kitchen sink. This wasn't just trespassing, it was a straight-up heist. After 2 months of pure chaos, I was done playing nice. It was time to reclaim my home. You won't believe what happened next. Not even the cops saw it coming. Let me take you back to when I first fell for this place at Lake Serenity. After 5 grueling years as a tech consultant, working 70-hour weeks and kissing weekends goodbye, I'd scraped together enough for my dream, a lakefront escape where I could work remotely and maybe rent it out for weekend getaways. The listing photos, they didn't do it justice. Floor-to-ceiling windows with water views that stole my breath, a sleek kitchen with appliances that made my inner chef do a happy dance, and a wraparound deck begging for morning coffee or sunset cocktails. When I rolled into that gravel driveway, fresh off a brutal bidding war that maxed out my savings, a feeling hit me one I hadn't felt since losing my parents. I was home. The previous owners left it in pristine shape, complete with notes on the septic system, winter heating quirks, and even the best local contractors. That first weekend, I dove in cleaning, organizing, dreaming up renovations. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. Will narrate your story on our channel. Would put my personal stamp on the place without destroying its rustic charm by Sunday evening, exhausted but satisfied. I was startled by a gentle knock at the door. That's when I met Grace Harper, my neighbor from 2 houses down, a professional photographer with an easy smile but cautious eyes. "Welcome to Lake Serenity," she said, offering a basket of local jams and fresh bread. "Just wanted to give you a proper introduction before the official welcome committee gets to you." The way she emphasized those last words made me pause. But I brushed it off as small-town politics, something I was more than happy to navigate for the sake of Lakeside tranquility. 3 days later, I received a formally worded email inviting me to attend the monthly Homeowners Association meeting as someone who'd only ever rented apartments in the city. I was completely unprepared for the world of HOAs, but I figured showing up would be a good way to meet neighbors and learn about community standards. I wore a button-down shirt and brought a bottle of wine as a gesture of goodwill. The meeting was held in a community clubhouse that looked like it had been decorated in the 1980s and never updated. All pastels and fake plants and wood paneling. About 20 people were gathered when I arrived, clustered in obvious social groupings, their conversations dropping to whispers when I walked in. And then I saw her for the first time, Vanessa Holloway, HOA president and apparent queen of Lake Serenity. She looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury real estate magazine. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair, clothes that screamed money without being flashy, and the kind of polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. I'd later learned she was 52, though she had the appearance and energy of someone much younger. When she saw me, that practiced smile tightened almost imperceptibly before she glided over, hand extended. "You must be Noah Mitchell. We're so pleased you could join us," she said, her tone warm. But something cold lurking beneath. Lake Serenity has a certain character we all work very hard to maintain. I do hope you'll find yourself able to contribute to that tradition. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it like she was measuring me for a coffin rather than welcoming me to a community. The meeting itself was an exercise in passive-aggressive micromanagement. Every agenda item seemed designed to control the most minute aspects of homeowners' lives, from the acceptable shades of exterior paint to the maximum height of front yard ornaments. When I raised my hand to ask a question about the community dock policies, Vanessa cut me off with a practiced, "We'll address new member questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Mitchell." At that appropriate time apparently was never after the meeting. Several neighbors introduced themselves warmly, seeming genuinely friendly, but always with quick glances toward Vanessa as if gauging her reaction to their interaction with me. The following Monday I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Inside was a list of 17 alleged violations discovered during an initial compliance review of my property. Everything from unauthorized deck furniture placement to non-standard mailbox height to excessive window visibility from the lake. Each violation carried a potential fine of $500 per day until corrected. At the bottom, a handwritten note and elegant script: "Perhaps you should reconsider if Lake Serenity is right for you. I know someone interested in taking this property off your hands." No signature, but it didn't take a detective to recognize this as Vanessa's opening salvo in what would become a 2-month nightmare. I didn't know it then, but I had just become the newest target of Lake Serenity's self-appointed property guardian, and she wouldn't stop until she had driven me out and claimed my house as her own. I sat in my living room that evening staring at the violation notice with a mix of confusion and growing anger. Nothing about this felt right. I'd purchased a well-maintained property that had passed inspection with flying colors. Just weeks earlier, there was no way it suddenly had 17 legitimate violations. I did what any reasonable person would do. I called my best friend, Daniel Wilson, an attorney specializing in property law. After listening to me vent for 10 minutes, Daniel's calm voice cut through my frustration. "Noah, this sounds like classic HOA overreach, but here's the thing. Lake Serenity's community charter is notorious in legal circles. They have unusually broad powers compared to most HOAs. We can fight this, but first you need to understand what you're dealing with," he promised. "To review the full HOA covenant, but in the meantime suggested I document everything and tried to address the alleged violations, however ridiculous they might seem, over the next week. I meticulously photographed every inch of my property. Each image, I adjusted the mailbox height, rearranged the deck furniture to the exact measurements specified in the HOA guidelines, and even painted my trash cans the approved shade of mountain shadow gray that cost me $90 per gallon at a specialty store 2 towns over. I submitted a formal response to each violation, complete with photographic evidence of compliance and respectful language that masked the simmering resentment building inside me. 3 days later, Vanessa Holloway appeared on my doorstep with a measuring tape and clipboard, accompanied by 2 stone-faced committee members. "Surprise inspection," she announced with a smile that reminded me of a shark. "We've received concerns about ongoing non-compliance issues." 4:45 excruciating minutes. I watched as she measured the distance between my deck chairs. Apparently 2 in 2, close documented the shade of my window frames, allegedly a forbidden tone of white, and took photographs of my garden beds, suspicious plants that might be invasive species. The entire time, she maintained a veneer of professional concern. But when her companions stepped away to examine the side yard, I overheard her phone conversation. "Don't worry, he won't last the summer. These tech Renault types always crack under pressure. They want everything fast and easy. They don't have the stomach for a real fight." The words sent ice through my veins, not just because of their content, but because they confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. This wasn't about violations. This was personal. That evening, I did some research on Vanessa Holloway, piecing together her background from local news, archives, and business records. The picture that emerged explained everything. Before becoming Lake Serenity's HOA president, Vanessa had been a successful real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. Her business had collapsed during the rise of Airbnb and tech-based rental platforms that disrupted traditional real estate markets. Public comments she'd made at county meetings revealed a deep bitterness toward technology interlopers destroying community character with transient renters. She didn't just dislike me. I represented everything she blamed for her professional downfall. And now she had the power of an HOA behind her vendetta. The monthly HOA meeting arrived, and I came prepared with a binder of documentation showing full compliance with all 17 original violations. I waited patiently through discussions of the upcoming community picnic and debates about geese control measures. But when I finally had the floor, Vanessa's tactics became clear. Every time I began explaining a point, she would interrupt with procedural questions or allow other members to interject with tangential concerns. After 15 frustrating minutes, I had only addressed 3 of the 17 issues, and the meeting was adjourned due to time constraints. As people gathered their things to leave, a woman I recognized from the board, Julia Parker, brushed past me, slipping a folded paper into my hand with a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. Once in my car, I unfolded the note. "This isn't about violations. She's done this before. Be careful." The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of machinery. I rushed outside to find a landscaping crew removing the native plant garden I'd carefully installed along the lakeside of my property. When I demanded an explanation, the foreman showed me a work order signed by Vanessa with official HOA letterhead citing invasive species concerns requiring immediate remediation. My protests fell on deaf ears. They were just doing their job, following orders from the HOA. I watched helplessly as they dug up hundreds of dollars worth of carefully selected plants, feeling a rage building that I hadn't experienced since childhood. Bullies had tormented me after my parents' death. That evening, reviewing my security camera footage, I saw Vanessa walking the perimeter of my house while I was at the grocery store, testing doorknobs and peering through windows. The violation notices, the inspections, the garden destruction, they weren't random acts of bureaucratic pettiness. They were calculated steps in a campaign to drive me out to days. Later, I received an emergency call from my biggest client, a system crash requiring immediate attention as I threw essentials into a bag for what would be a 10-day trip to their headquarters. I caught sight of Vanessa watching from across the street. Phone to her ear, our eyes met briefly, and the look of satisfaction on her face sent a chill down my spine as my rideshare pulled away from the curb. I heard her speaking into her phone. "He's gone. Time to move to phase 2. I didn't know what she meant, but the knot in my stomach told me I would return to find things far worse than destroyed gardens. I was right, but even my darkest imaginings couldn't prepare me for what was waiting when I finally made it back to Lake Serenity after 10 grueling days solving my client's technical crisis. I arrived back at Lake Serenity well past midnight, exhausted to my bones, and looking forward to sleeping in my own bed the moment my key failed to turn in the lock. A wave of disbelief washed over me. I tried again, thinking perhaps the mechanism was stiff, but there was no mistaking it. My key simply didn't fit anymore. Someone had changed the locks on my house. My first reaction was to call the HOA emergency line, which went straight to voicemail. I then tried Vanessa's personal number, which rang without answer. Standing on my own porch, locked out of my own house at nearly 1 in the morning, I felt a strange mix of fury and helplessness that took me straight back to childhood, the day my distant uncle had changed the locks on my parents' house after their funeral, declaring that I would be better off elsewhere. As I contemplated my next move, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Lights were on inside my house, and through the window I could see unfamiliar people moving around in my living room. This wasn't just a lock change. Someone was living in my house. I immediately called the local police, and 20 minutes later, Officer Colin Bennett arrived. His expression shifting from routine concern to genuine confusion. As I explained the situation when we knocked, the door was opened by a middle-aged man in lounge pants and a t-shirt, looking equally confused and slightly alarmed at the police presence. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, as a woman and 2 teenage children appeared behind him, all wearing expressions of growing concern. The next 15 minutes were surreal. The family, the Simmons family from Ohio, produced a legitimate-looking rental agreement for a 2-week stay, paid in full, to an entity called Lake Serenity Rentals, LLC. They showed email, correspondence, payment confirmations, and a welcome packet that included instructions for the home's features. The property address was unquestionably mine, but the owner was listed as Holloway Property Management Officer Bennett. Clearly uncomfortable with the situation, explained that this appeared to be a civil matter rather than criminal trespassing. "Sir, I understand you believe this is your home, and I'm not disputing that. But these folks have documentation showing they rented it legally. This needs to be sorted out through proper channels." He suggested I find accommodation for the night and contact a lawyer in the morning. The Simmons family, to their credit, offered to gather their things and leave, but I couldn't bring myself to displace a family with children in the middle of the night. "It's not your fault," I told them, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay tonight, we'll figure this out tomorrow." I spent that night in a budget motel, 15 mi away, alternating between rage and despair. At 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I came dangerously close to giving up. Maybe I should just sell the house and cut my losses. Maybe the peace I sought wasn't worth this kind of battle. As that thought formed, I suddenly recognized it for what it was, exactly the reaction Vanessa was counting on. She had escalated from harassment to outright theft of my property, and she expected me to break. That realization was like a switch flipping in my brain. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about refusing to let someone abuse their power to take what wasn't theirs. "This is exactly what she wants," I whispered to the empty room. The victim mentality that had briefly overtaken me burned away, replaced by something colder and more focused. The old Noah might have walked away to avoid conflict, but that person was gone. It was time to play her game, but better. As soon as businesses opened, I began investigating. Within hours. I discovered my house listed on multiple vacation rental websites with glowing descriptions of waterfront luxury and personalized management. By Vanessa Holloway, reviews from previous guests mentioned her by name, praising her attention to detail and local recommendations. Some listings included hilariously bad photoshopped images where Vanessa had poorly inserted her face onto stock. Photos of professional property managers standing in front of various homes. I found incorporation documents for Lake Serenity Rentals LLC, filed just 3 weeks earlier with Vanessa listed as the sole proprietor. This wasn't an impulsive act. She had been planning this takeover methodically, probably from the moment I bought the house. I met the Simmons family for coffee that afternoon, explaining the situation without casting blame on them. They were understandably shocked and embarrassed, but also angry at being unwitting participants in what was clearly fraud. They showed me their complete paper trail, including bank transfers to Vanessa's personal account and text messages coordinating their arrival. "We just wanted a nice family vacation," Mrs. Simmons said, shaking her head. "We never would have stayed if we'd known," I assured them. I didn't blame them and suggested they continue their vacation while I sorted things out. After all, they had paid for accommodations in good faith in exchange. They agreed to provide statements about their rental experience if needed legally that evening. I called Daniel from the motel, my voice steady as I laid out everything that had happened. His initial stunned silence was followed by a string of legal terms I'd never heard before, none of them flattering to Vanessa. "This isn't just HOA overreach anymore, Noah. This is criminal fraud, theft, and about 5 other felonies. We're not just filing injunctions, we're building a case that could send her to jail." As Daniel outlined our legal options, I received an email from Julia Parker. "I have everything you need. Meet me tomorrow. Come alone." The message included an address for a coffee shop 2 towns over. As I drafted my response, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Vanessa had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she had no idea what was coming. The woman who thought she could steal my house was about to learn a painful lesson. She had picked the wrong tech guy to mess with. The next morning, I arrived at the designated coffee shop 20 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a view of both entrances. Julia Parker arrived precisely on time. Her professional appearance, crisp blazer, subtle makeup contrasting with the nervous energy radiating from her. She ordered a coffee but didn't touch it, instead glancing frequently toward the door as if expecting to be followed. "I shouldn't be here," were her first words, spoken so quietly I had to lean in to hear her. "Vanessa has eyes and ears everywhere in the community. If she finds out I'm talking to you." She left the sentence hanging, but her expression completed the thought. This wasn't just neighborhood gossip. Julia was genuinely afraid. Over the next hour, she laid out a pattern of behavior that made my blood run cold. Vanessa had been targeting new homeowners who didn't fit her vision for years, particularly singles, minorities, or anyone she suspected might use their property for short-term rentals. "You're not the first, just the most aggressive case," Julia explained, sliding a USB drive across the table. "This contains internal HOA emails showing the targeted harassment campaign against you and others, board meeting minutes that were never officially recorded, financial records showing misappropriation of HOA funds for personal expenses." When I asked why she was helping me, her eyes welled up. "She has leverage over me," financial troubles from my divorce that would affect my custody battle for my kids. If made public, I've been her puppet for 2 years, watching her destroy people, and I can't do it anymore. That afternoon, I met with Grace Harper at her photography studio, under the pretense of discussing professional photos of my property once. Alone, she revealed her own history with Vanessa 3 years ago. She drove out my friends, a same-sex couple, who bought the lakefront property next to hers. Constant violations. Rumors about loud parties they sold at a massive loss after 6 months to Vanessa's sister Grace had been documenting Vanessa's patterns ever since, photographing her interactions with targeted homeowners, keeping records of the properties that mysteriously changed hands after harassment campaigns. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her, Grace said, showing me files containing time-stamped photos of Vanessa's previous victims. The community is terrified of her, but if someone finally fought back with evidence. I spent the evening reviewing everything I'd gathered, creating a timeline of Vanessa's actions against me and others. The pattern was clear. Identify targets, overwhelm them with violations and fines, isolate them socially, escalate to property damage or access denial, and finally pressure them to sell at a loss to connected buyers. The next morning, I attempted to retrieve some personal belongings from my house, only to discover Vanessa had installed a new security system with cameras, monitoring the entrances. As I stood in the driveway, contemplating my next move, Vanessa's luxury SUV pulled up beside me. Trespassing is a serious offense, Mr. Mitchell, she called through her open window phone, already dialing. I'm calling security. Before I could respond, a private security guard appeared from around the side of the house. This gentleman is trespassing on private property, Vanessa announced with theatrical concern. Please escort him off the premises. The security guard, clearly uncomfortable but following orders, suggested I leave to avoid complications as I walk toward my rental car. Vanessa couldn't resist a parting shot. By the way, the HOA emergency meeting about your numerous lease violations is scheduled for Friday. Given your absence from the property, the board will be voting on whether to implement the owner abandonment clause in our covenant. Such a shame to lose another homeowner who couldn't maintain our standards. The smug satisfaction in her voice made my hands shake with anger, but I maintained my composure until I was out of sight. Later that day, I learned from Grace that Vanessa had been spreading rumors that I was an absentee owner, using the property for commercial parties with unsavory elements. Thinly veiled language designed to trigger the community's worst instincts at night in the motel room that had become my temporary command center. I experienced my first moment of real doubt. Vanessa had the HOA board, the security company, and seemingly the entire community apparatus behind her. She had locked me out of my own home, was renting it illegally, and was now attempting to trigger an obscure covenant clause to seize the property entirely. For a brief moment, I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was facing. Daniel noticed my silence during our strategy call. Noah, remember what you told me about after your parents died, how the bullies at your new school thought you were an easy target because you were quiet? I nodded, remembering those painful days, and remember what happened when they pushed you too far. I did remember the carefully planned, methodical response that had not only stopped the bullying, but had established me as someone who should never be underestimated. She doesn't just want your house, Noah. She wants to break. You don't let her. Daniel's reminder was exactly what I needed. The momentary doubt burned away, replaced by crystalline resolve. It was time to turn the tables on Vanessa Holloway. I picked up my phone and called her directly, deliberately making my voice sound strained and defeated. "Miss Holloway, this is Noah Mitchell. I think we need to talk about the property situation. This whole thing has become too stressful. I'm considering selling and moving on." There was a moment of silence before she responded, unable to fully mask the triumph in her voice. "That might be for the best, Mr. Mitchell. As it happens, I might know an interested buyer. My niece was quite disappointed when you outbid her. Originally, I forced a sigh. I just want this nightmare to end. Maybe we could discuss terms." She agreed, immediately suggesting we meet at the house the following afternoon. What she couldn't see was my laptop screen, showing recording software capturing our entire conversation and the complex strategy flowchart I'd spent days developing. A plan that was about to enter its final devastating phase. With Vanessa taking the bait, I accelerated the counterattack plan. I rented a cabin just outside the Lake Serenity community boundary, converting the living room into what Daniel jokingly called our war room. Whiteboards covered with timelines, legal statutes, and action plans lined the walls. Grace's photographs and evidence from Julia were organized chronologically, showing the systematic nature of Vanessa's schemes. Daniel prepared a stack of legal documents, cease and desist letters, draft complaints for multiple civil causes of action and potential criminal charges. "We're not just building a case," he explained as we reviewed the materials. "We're building a trap that she's going to walk into willingly." I filed an official complaint with the county records office documenting the fraudulent rental business operating under Vanessa's name, ensuring there would be an official investigation. Own story of harassment escalating to property interference. Two had sold it a low-ball offer after mysterious water damage that occurred while they were away. All agreed to provide statements and potential testimony if needed. Julia also provided access to HOA financial records, showing Vanessa had been misappropriating funds for years, using community money for personal expenses, inflating maintenance costs, and pocketing the difference, even charging the HOH for administrative services through shell companies she controlled. With evidence mounting, Officer Bennett began taking a more active interest in the situation. While initially reluctant to intervene in what appeared to be a civil dispute, the pattern of fraud and potential criminal activity caught his attention. "I can't officially investigate without a formal complaint," he told me during a discreet meeting at a diner 20 meters from Lake Serenity. Carefully chosen words made it clear he was willing to help. Once we had assembled our case, I also installed hidden trail cameras around the property perimeter. Activity around my house without being easily detected. Vanessa, believing she had me on the run, accelerated her timeline. The board planned to invoke the owner abandonment clause, a rare-used provision that could potentially transfer deed control under certain circumstances. Meanwhile, Vanessa's niece began calling me directly, pressuring for a discount sale and suggesting that things could get much worse if I didn't accept their generous offer. The trail cameras proved their worth, capturing Vanessa entering my house, repeatedly removing personal items she claimed to be storing safely, and most damning of all, showing the house to potential buyers while the Simmons family was away on a day trip. In a move designed to increase pressure on Vanessa, I initiated what appeared to be a desperate social media live stream about my stolen house, describing the situation in terms vague enough to avoid defamation, but specific enough to attract local media attention. The strategy worked better than expected. A reporter from the regional news station contacted me for details, and by the weekend, Vanessa was ambushed with questions about rental fraud allegations as she attended a country club. In front of her, the community whispers had begun cracks forming in her carefully maintained facade of authority. Recognizing the mounting pressure, I executed the next phase of the plan. A public confrontation designed to make Vanessa believe her tactics had finally broken me at a popular lakeside restaurant where several HOA board members were having dinner. I approached Vanessa's table, voice raised just enough to attract attention without causing a scene. "Is this what you wanted?" I demanded, my performance fueled by genuine emotions. Vanessa's initial surprise quickly transformed into smug satisfaction as she witnessed what appeared to be my public meltdown. "Mr. Mitchell, please control yourself," she responded loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. This kind of emotional outburst only confirms the board's concerns about your suitability for our community. I stormed out, leaving whispers and stares in my wake, exactly as planned. The following morning, I received notice from the county that property records showed an attempt to transfer my deed using the owner abandonment clause in the HOA agreement. Vanessa had accelerated her plan, believing I was on the verge of total breakdown and vulnerable to a final push. Daniel reviewed the filing and smiled grimly. "She's overplayed her hand. This premature filing gives us legal grounds for immediate injunctive relief." As we prepared the emergency court filings, I turned to the wall of evidence we'd assembled: photographs. Pattern of harassment, fraud, and theft, orchestrated by one woman, drunk on power and bitter over past failures. "She took the bait," I told Daniel, as we finalized our preparations. Time for phase 2, the predator who thought she had cornered helpless prey was about to discover she'd actually been lured into a cage, one with very solid legal bars. With Vanessa now fully committed to her scheme, believing she had me on the verge of surrender, it was time to spring the trap we'd so carefully constructed. Daniel filed an emergency injunction against the HOA's attempt to invoke the abandonment clause, ensuring that no property transfer could occur while legal proceedings were pending. A complimentary day trip to a popular attraction 50 miles away. Their rental situation they happily accepted. Grace positioned herself strategically across the lake with her professional telephoto lenses ready to document. Assembled an overwhelming legal case, the documentation from Julia of community funds, evidence of the fraudulent rental business operating under Vanessa's name, and most critically, a recording Julia had recently obtained of Vanessa, explicitly instructing the HOA board on targeting me. "We need to make the violation notices so overwhelming that he gives up. These tech rental types always break if you push hard enough, officer." Bennett, now fully convinced of the criminal nature of the scheme, agreed to be present for what we anticipated would be a confrontation requiring law enforcement. "This isn't just HOA overreach anymore." Niece's offer: "I'm ready to discuss terms for selling the property. Could we meet at the house tomorrow at 2? Her response came almost immediately, barely concealing her triumph. "That seems properly like a sensible decision, Mr. Mitchell. I'll bring the necessary paperwork to ensure a smooth transition." What she didn't know was that I had installed multiple hidden cameras, cloud storage that would preserve whatever happened next as legally admissible evidence from a monitoring station Set up in Grace's studio across the lake, we watched as Vanessa arrived nearly 30 minutes early, using her own key to enter my house. With the confident stride of someone who already considered the property hers for the previous owner made some decent upgrades to the kitchen. No, don't worry about the current occupants. They'll be gone by next week, and I already have interested buyers. For a quick flip, she brought in a professional photographer to take new listing photos, openly discussing marketing strategies. For once the property is secured, most damning of all, she collected cash deposits from 3 separate potential buyers, who arrived at staggered intervals, providing them with exclusive first opportunity at a property she did not own. The real breakthrough came when Vanessa received a call from another HOA board member, apparently concerned about the accelerated timeline. With remarkable candor, she explained her entire operation. This is no different than the Peterson place or the lakefront property we secured last year. Find the vulnerability, apply pressure force. A distress sale flipped to a preferred buyer. I've been running this system for years, and it's kept the right kind of people in Lake Serenity. The call, captured in high-definition audio and video, was the final piece of evidence we needed, an explicit admission of a systematic fraud scheme. At precisely 2 o'clock, Vanessa was in full sales mode. System chimed, alerting her to the front door. Opening the glass froze halfway to her lips as I walked in, followed by Daniel, Officer Bennett, 2 county officials, and the entire HOH board. That Julia had quietly assembled. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor as she stared in open shock. For a moment, the room was completely silent, except for the gentle hum of the security camera that was capturing it all. I believe you're in my house, Vanessa, I said calmly, and I think we need to talk about exactly what's been happening at Lake Serenity. What followed was one of the most satisfying 30 minutes of my life. As the potential buyers and Vanessa's niece backed away in confusion, I methodically presented the evidence we had gathered: the fraudulent rental operation, the illegal lock changes, the theft of my personal property, the attempted deed transfer, Grace's photographs documenting Vanessa's pattern of harassment against multiple homeowners. Julia, finding courage in numbers, revealed to the stunned board members the full extent of Vanessa's manipulation, how she had threatened Julia's custody battle to ensure her compliance, how she had misappropriated HOA funds for personal use, how she had systematically targeted homeowners who didn't fit her vision for the community. The coup de grace came when Julia read aloud an email Vanessa had sent to the board 6 weeks earlier. These tech wrangle people need to learn. Lake Serenity isn't for their kind. We've protected our values before. We'll do it again. Officer Bennett, who had remained professionally neutral until this point, stepped forward to inform Vanessa that based on the evidence presented, a criminal investigation into fraud and theft would be initiated immediately. The HOA board members, many seeing the full picture for the first time, voted on the spot to remove Vanessa from her position. As the reality of her situation dawned on her, Vanessa made one last desperate attempt to regain control, turning to Julia with a vicious smile. You really want everyone to know about your financial situation, how you nearly lost your house, how you can barely support your children. Julia's voice shook but held firm. I already told them everything, Vanessa. That's the difference between us. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. With her final leverage attempt failed, Vanessa tried to push past Officer Bennett toward the door, only to find every exit blocked by witnesses or authorities. She turned back to me, her carefully maintained facade crumbling to reveal the bitterness beneath. You have no idea what people like you have done to communities like this. You buy properties as investments, not homes. You bring in transient renters who don't care about traditions or standards. You destroyed my business, my livelihood, with your tech platforms and rental apps. For the first time, I saw the wounded person behind the predatory behavior, someone who had channeled legitimate grievances into destructive vendettas. The difference between us, Vanessa, isn't that I want to rent my property sometimes. The difference is that I didn't want to destroy you. I just wanted my home back. As Officer Bennett began reading her rights, the magnitude of what she had lost, her position, her reputation, possibly her freedom, finally registered. On Vanessa's face, the Queen of Lake Serenity had been dethroned, and the community she had ruled through fear was watching it happen in real time. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings, community meetings, and long overdue reckonings. At Lake Serenity, Vanessa faced multiple criminal charges: fraud, theft, illegal property access, attempted deed transfer under false pretenses, plus a civil lawsuit from homeowners she had targeted. The financial records Julia provided revealed Vanessa had pocketed over $50,000 from fraudulent rentals of properties she didn't own, plus thousands more from misappropriated HOA funds. The district attorney, recognizing the scope of the scheme, assigned a special prosecutor to the case. This isn't just one person being harassed, he explained during our initial meeting. This appears to be a systematic operation targeting multiple homeowners over several years. The HOA board, chastened by their unwitting complicity in Vanessa's schemes, voted unanimously to implement new transparency measures, including recorded meetings, public financial reports, and an independent review of all violation notices. They invited me to join the reform committee, which I accepted on the condition that we revisit many of the more restrictive and arbitrary regulations that had given Vanessa her power. In the first place, Lake Serenity should be defined by its natural beauty and community spirit, I suggested at my first meeting, not by how many inches apart deck chairs need to be placed. The relief on many longtime residents' faces was palpable. They had been living under Vanessa's regime for so long that they had forgotten there were other ways to maintain a pleasant community with Daniel's guidance. We established a class action lawsuit for homeowners who had been driven out by tactics, seeking to recover damages for property sold under duress at below market values. 3 former residents returned for the first hearing, describing nearly identical patterns of harassment escalating to property interference. The court was particularly interested in the paper trail showing how properties had consistently ended up in the hands of Vanessa's relatives or associates after the original owners were forced out. This wasn't just pettiness, Daniel explained to the judge. This was a coordinated scheme to manipulate property values and control transfers within a restricted market. A particularly powerful moment came during a community meeting called to address the fallout after hours of discussion about policy changes and remediation efforts. An elderly resident who had lived at Lake Serenity for over 30 years stood up. "We've been silent too long," he said, his voice wavering but determined. "Thank you, Noah, for reminding us that property ownership doesn't come with mandatory submission to tyranny. Many of us knew things weren't right, but we were afraid to speak up. Never again." His words triggered a standing ovation that left me embarrassed but deeply moved. What had begun as a personal fight for my home had evolved into something larger, a community reclaiming its identity from someone who had twisted legitimate concerns about preservation into weapons of control. Finally, after weeks of living in hotels and temporary accommodations, I officially moved back into my lake house. The Simmons family had long since returned to Ohio, but not before we had become unlikely friends, bonded by our shared experience as Vanessa's victims. I hosted a thank you gathering for those who had helped Daniel, Grace, Julia, Officer Bennett, and others who had provided support or evidence, standing on my deck, the same deck that had once been cited for non-compliant furniture placement. Surrounded by new friends, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since my parents' death. Where we can truly belong, Grace and I lingered after the others had left. Our conversation flowing between us was unmistakable, but neither of us rushed to define it, both content to let whatever was developing between us unfold naturally without pressure or expectations. As we sat watching the stars emerge over the lake, I found myself reflecting on the journey from that first certified letter to this moment of hard-won tranquility. You know, Grace said, seeming to read my thoughts. When you first moved in, I warned you about the welcome committee, but I never imagined it would turn into all this. I laughed, the sound echoing across the water. Next time, maybe be a little more specific. Something like, watch out for the HOA president. She might change your locks and rent out your house while you're away. Micromanagement. Agreeing to build a transparent online violation reporting platform that would ensure no single person could ever again weaponize community standards against individual. The legacy, the community's bonds. As for Vanessa, her legal consequences included a suspended sentence conditional on community service in replanting native species and removing invasive plants along the shoreline. She had once policed so vigorously, I encountered her there, one particularly. Before she looked down, the shame evident in her posture. On impulse, I offered her the extra bottle of water I was carrying. It's brutal out here. She accepted the water with visible surprise. No one ever gave me the chance to make amends before, she said after a moment, gesturing toward the restoration work. This lake project, I fought against it for years. Now I see what we were trying to protect all along, I replied. Even those who have to learn that lesson the hard way. As I walked away, I glimpsed something I never. They say karma comes back to you in the end, but sometimes karma needs a little help from someone who's done their homework and has really, really good security cameras. You watched